The 1288 Polish trap that decimated the Mongol horde. Night fell early over the forests of Lesser Poland. The kind of night that swallowed sound and bent distance until a man could not tell whether the footsteps behind him belonged to a friend or a ghost. Snow had begun to fall, not the gentle kind that softens the world, but sharp flakes driven sideways by wind, needling through wool and leather. Somewhere beyond the trees, hooves thundered, hundreds of them, their rhythm like a war drum pounding against the ribs of Europe. For nearly half a century, that sound had meant only one thing: terror. Villages burned, armies vanished, and the Mongol horde rode on, seemingly unstoppable. But in the winter of 1287-1288, in the borderlands of Poland, something changed. The thunder entered a maze it did not understand. And for once, the silence that followed belonged not to the Mongols, but to their enemies. By the late 13th century, the Mongol name still carried a supernatural weight across Europe. Chroniclers described them as demons from the east, scourges sent by God, horsemen who could ride for days without rest and kill with merciless efficiency. This fear had been earned. In 1241, Mongol armies had shattered Polish and Hungarian forces, crushing knights at Legnica and devastating the heart of Central Europe. Only the sudden death of the Great Khan had pulled them back, not European resistance. The lesson seemed clear. When the Mongols came, survival meant submission, flight, or luck. But history has a way of hiding its turning points in places no one expects. And Poland, fractured and often overlooked, was about to become one of them. Poland in the 1280s was not a unified kingdom, but a patchwork of duchies, ruled by Piast princes whose rivalries often mattered more than foreign threats. Yet this fragmentation, usually a weakness, would become part of an unlikely defense. The Mongols returned in 1287, confident and methodical, launching a coordinated invasion led by Nogai Khan and Talabuga, a grandson of Batu Khan. Their plan was familiar. Fast-moving columns would strike deep, living off the land, terrorizing populations, and preventing any organized resistance. Krakow fell, sacked and burned, just as it had decades earlier. To many, it seemed history was repeating itself. But beneath the smoke, the Polish response was different this time. They knew they could not meet the Mongols in open battle, where mobility and archery ruled. Instead, they chose denial and deception. Fortresses were strengthened and stocked, not as rally points for field armies, but as anchors of resistance. Populations were evacuated into forests, hills, and fortified towns, leaving behind empty landscapes stripped of supplies. Roads were watched, river crossings were prepared, and most importantly, the Poles allowed the Mongols to believe that fear still ruled. Fear, after all, was the Mongols' greatest weapon. Their reputation often broke enemies before arrows ever flew. But reputation cuts both ways. The Mongol commanders expected panic, flight, and easy plunder. What they found instead was a country that refused to react as expected. Villages were abandoned, storehouses were empty, scouts brought back conflicting reports. The land itself seemed hostile. Dense forests, frozen rivers, narrow passes, and muddy tracks that slowed the great herds of horses the Mongols depended on. Winter, usually an ally that froze rivers into highways, became unpredictable and cruel. As the Mongols pushed deeper, their columns began to stretch. Communication between units weakened. Foraging parties had to travel farther and farther to find food, exposing themselves to ambush. This was no accident. Polish forces, smaller and slower, avoided direct confrontation, but watched constantly. Local knights, peasants, and foresters, men who knew every ravine and stream, became the eyes of the defense. Signals passed silently through horn calls and messengers on foot. The Mongols were being studied, measured, and led. The trap was not a single battlefield, but a campaign of exhaustion. One Mongol detachment after another was lured into unfavorable terrain. Narrow forest paths prevented massed cavalry maneuvers. Swamps swallowed horses, snow hid pitfalls, and felled trees placed deliberately across routes of advance. When the Mongols dismounted to clear obstacles, Polish crossbowmen struck from cover, then vanished. Supplies dwindled. Horses weakened. The psychological balance began to shift. The decisive moment came not with a grand clash of armies, but with a series of coordinated strikes during the Mongols' withdrawal. By early 1288, the invasion had stalled. Fortified cities like Sandomierz and Wrocław held firm. Krakow, though damaged, had not delivered the decisive blow the Mongols expected. With losses mounting and little to show for the campaign, Nogai and Talabuga ordered a retreat. That order, in enemy territory, during winter, was deadly. The Poles struck then with precision, retreat routes were harassed relentlessly, small Mongol units were isolated and destroyed, river crossings became killing zones as ice broke beneath the weight of men and horses. Chronicles describe Mongol warriors drowning under the weight of their armor, arrows useless as they struggled in freezing water. For once, speed, the Mongols' greatest strength, worked against them. Panic spread through units that had never known it. Losses mounted into the thousands. While exact numbers are impossible to confirm, contemporary accounts agree on one point. The Mongols suffered a disaster unlike any they had experienced in Europe since their first arrival. It was not total annihilation, but it was decisive enough to shatter the myth of their invincibility. They limped back east, weakened, divided, and shaken. Poland, battered but unbroken, remained unconquered. What made the 1288 Polish defense remarkable was not a single hero or battle, but a collective understanding of the enemy. The Poles did not try to outfight the Mongols. They outlasted and outfought them. They turned terrain into a weapon, time into an ally, and fear into a tool used against the invader. It was a lesson that would echo across Europe as other powers learned that the Mongols could be resisted, not with bravado, but with patience. In the years that followed, the Mongol threat to Central Europe faded. Internal conflicts within the Mongol Empire, combined with the rising strength and adaptation of European states, shifted the balance. The invasion of 1287 to 1288 would be the last major Mongol incursion into Poland. When chroniclers later wrote of this period, their tone changed. The Mongols were still feared, but no longer unstoppable. Beyond terror, beyond legend, the winter campaign of 1288 stands as a quiet turning point. No grand monuments mark the forests where horses fell and men froze. No epic poems celebrate the anonymous villagers who emptied their homes and vanished into the woods. Against an enemy built on speed and fear, Poland answered with patience and silence, and in doing so, rewrote the ending of a story Europe had believed was already decided. The sound of hooves would still echo in memory, but after 1288, it no longer meant the end of the world. It meant that even the greatest horde could be trapped, bled, and broken, not by terror, but by resolve. I've put the full long-form script into the canvas, so you can work with it comfortably, edit, expand, or reuse it for narration, without scrolling chaos.